Today, we discuss Asperger's syndrome and two unique local approaches to understanding that syndrome only on A Healthier Charlotte. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of A Healthier Charlotte. I'm your host, Bobby DeMuro. Today on the show, we'll look at Asperger's syndrome, an autism spectrum disorder characterized by significant difficulty in social interaction and more. And let's go right to the panel today and meet our guests, all experts, of course. First, Dr. Frank Gaskill is the man behind Southeast Psych and an expert on Asperger's who has a very unique comic book that's working wonders for those with AS. Next to him, Mary B. Moore is also with Southeast Psych and is the co-founder of the Epiphany School of Charlotte, an alternative educational solution for children with social and communication challenges. And finally, Gail Faithful is the other co-founder of the Epiphany School and the head of school, the person in charge. I'm sitting next to the president, if you will. So welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get started. Mary, I want to start with you just because we've been joking off camera and giving you a hard time. Frame Asperger's for us. Before we booked this show, I had never heard of it and I didn't know what it was. What characterizes it and what are we talking about here?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, we don't consider Asperger's a disorder or a syndrome.
There you go.
We just see it as a difference,
Okay.
a brain difference. And actually, we think it's awesome. It is characterized, really at the core, having social and communication issues. And you had mentioned, problems with social interaction, that difficulty understanding cues of others, having two-way conversations, being able to know how to respond appropriately in a conversation. But that piece of it is the cognitive piece and what we call theory of mind skills, and not being able to understand the perspective of someone else, being able to put yourself in the shoes of others. And so that can cause a lot of difficulties. Also, other things that come along with it, there's sensory issues oftentimes, hypersensitivity to all different senses like sound, sight, texture, smells. There are also challenges sometimes with motor coordination, being clumsy, or having fine motor issues.
Except for Clay Marzo.
Oh, yes, our
Clay
awesome
Marzo,
surfer.
number one surfer in the world, Aspie.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. When we look at Aspie's, Gail, I guess frame the issue for us. How many people are we talking about here? Are there millions affected? Do we have a gauge on numbers? I mean, how common is this?
I'm going to ask Frank to address the numbers. I'm not going to pull it out.
Well, the numbers are hard to pin down, but right now it's sounding like 1 out of 88 is on the spectrum. I actually think it's more than that. It's hard to define because it's poorly defined.
Yeah.
And I think the field is still working on that.
Well, what about treatment? Let's go back to you for that because the prognosis here, we mentioned communication challenges. We mentioned some things that on the outset from the layman may be difficult to see in somebody or recognize as a problem. So
Right.
is there a treatment? Is there a prognosis?
Well, I call it, Mary B and I call it, it's self-understanding is step one, understanding from teachers and parents and family, and then understand and accept themselves. And then the second part will be skill building. And there's hundreds of skills, and the skills can be taught individually, taught in settings, or taught in groups. And most of the stuff that I do is group skill building.
And Gail, from the school perspective, from the education perspective, we look at communication issues and skill building. And, these are things a lot of kids struggle with, whether or not they have Asperger's. What's the extra challenge having Aspies to maybe teach these kids or acclimate these kids to a normal conversation, a normal mode of communication?
So much in our conversation, there's so many things happening at one time in very small intervals of time. And for these kids who it doesn't come innately, these social communication skills, to be able to be in a setting where all day they can be supported, that their skills can be scaffolded. We have a classroom in the morning called Friends and Feelings, where we focus on maybe a particular social communication skill, but then throughout the day, there are opportunities, just incidental learning and teachable moments where something can happen, and in the moment, we can help support children to work through those.
Is there a quantifiable, I guess, level of success that you can see a child moving along a spectrum, they're getting better? I mean, can you quantify that, or do you just kind of observe that over time?
Well, we quantify it in the sense of, is this skill emerging? Is it emerging in what context and with what people? And then over time, is it developing in a sense that I don't have to scaffold as much or as highly? And is it generalizing then into other situations with other people and outside into the community?
Let's talk about the community then, Dr. Gaskell, because I've got to wonder when we look at Asperger's and we deal with kids primarily here, what's the prognosis for adults? I mean, are they at risk for other psychological issues or depression or something, or is it just kind of on a case-by-case basis?
Well, like Mary B. she works with the younglings, and when they graduate from her Jedi Academy, they move up to me as they get older. But in terms of prognosis, I would look and say, well, Dan Aykroyd, famous Aspie,
Yeah.
prognosis pretty darn good. Wrote Ghostbusters. He's obsessed with ghosts. There are other people who I'd say are not out of the closet Aspies yet. Hope that they identify themselves, which would be probably a Mark Zuckerberg, maybe a Tim Burton. I believe also Bill
What
Gates.
makes you think those people, just general behaviors? I mean, what are the signs?
Well, there was an interview on 60 Minutes where Mark Zuckerberg was being interviewed, and it's just sort of these awkward social moments, literal thinking, black and white thinking. And it doesn't mean, okay, this is a disorder. I don't come at this as a disorder. I think it's a better kind of brain. On average, Asperger's adults make more money than non-Asperger or neurotypicals. So I don't even really think of it as prognosis. If kids aren't identified early, or even by the time they're 12, once they hit grade 4, and boy brains turn on and start saying, hey, you're different, then the bullying happens, and that's when kids can really get messed up. So we try to just keep them safe.
Mary, when we look at especially young kids that you kind of deal with, how important is self-acceptance for them? Understanding, like Dr. Gaskell says, it's not a disorder, it's not a syndrome, it's not a problem, but it might actually be an asset. How do you guys work to, I guess, help people with Aspies feel better about themselves?
Right, right. Well, it's first about embracing the difference. And I think that's what makes what we do at Southeast Psych and what we do at Epiphany very unique. And often what separates kids in their typical schools or in their larger community are the quirkiness of their challenges. And that also, because it can set them up to be bullied or teased or ostracized. So, and that subsequently also creates a lot of anxiety. And comes with a lot of challenges in that regard. But with us, and the way in our philosophy is those differences are actually what bring us together, and we're celebrated. So it is very important that kids embrace, and all Aspies and all parents and teachers, the strengths and needs of each person. And yeah.
With the differences, Dr. Gaskell, if a parent's watching this and says, hey, this sounds familiar, my son, my daughter exhibit some of these, are there signs they look for? Is there a certain age that this can begin to be, I mean, do you test for it? How do you determine who's on this spectrum?
Well, a lot of parents have told me, well, I always knew something was up, but I didn't know what it is. And many kids have come to me when they're 8 or 9 and have been told, well, you're anxious, or you have OCD, or you're ADHD. And while those things can be the case, the kids, they were first described by Hans Asperger as little professors. They tend to do better with adults than with kids. They can have meltdowns. I don't want to say that it's all roses with Asperger's. There's a significant downside. But you can go through a formal assessment. I look at IQ, patterns of IQ scores. There's a checklist, the ASD. There are interview formats. When they're really young, you can do the ADOS to screen for autism. But you can be evaluated for this. You've just got to make sure that parents talk to their pediatrician or psychologist and say, are you familiar with this? And walk in with knowledge, because some people may say, yeah, I know what that is, when they really don't.
Is there an overdiagnosis issue? I'm sorry, I'm curious, is there an overdiagnosis issue? We look at ADHD and ADD, and you could probably argue that that's overdiagnosed or overmedicated. Is there any potential issue here, or are we still on the other end of the curve?
I think we're seeing the rates go up because it's now finally being diagnosed. The word Asperger's as a formal diagnosis has only existed since 1993.
Okay.
So if you think, how long have graduate students been educated about this? I don't know, for maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
And the research is still poor. So I would say it's probably still under-recognized across the whole spectrum.
Mary, is there a stigma, I guess, attached with this? Because I think about autoimmune disorders, for example. You can't see it. It exists, but if I
Yes.
look at you, I can't tell that you have it, like if you had, broken your leg. Is there that same stigma here that it's difficult to explain to people? It's difficult for kids to explain to their friends? I mean, how does that relationship flesh itself out as kids get older and kind of have to deal with this in the real world, so to speak?
Well, what we embrace is being open and upfront and erasing the stigma. So it's through awareness and being able to, and it's not about even saying, oh, I'm Aspie. It's being able to say, oh, look, this is how I see the world. This is how I interpret the world. These are my strengths. And being able to communicate that. It is important that parents are the advocate for their child.
Yeah.
And helping to make teachers and coaches and other people involved with their child aware of the needs and strengths of their child and what things work. It's also front-end focus. You really want to make sure that you are preparing those individuals to understand, because what may look like, inattention or maybe oppositional defiant behavior, really there's more to the story.
And at our practice, we sell a T-shirt that it says, "I had Asperger's before it was cool," and that's the message. And we're saying, and you see it. You see The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon.
Yeah.
He's an Aspie on that show. The movie about Vegas where they go, what was that thing? The Hangover.
Yeah.
The guy with the beard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Aspie.
Yeah.
It seems like, not to get too far into the Big Bang
Yeah.
Theory if people don't watch,
Sure.
but it seems like something like that's an implied Asperger's syndrome.
It is.
Is there a value, when I think about awareness, Gail, is there a value to maybe explicitly say this character or this person has Asperger's and he's pretty darn cool? I mean, will that help the process?
I think so. As with all of us and with any of our kids, for us, any of us to be aware of not only our strengths, but the areas, and be able to name and own and say the areas that I struggle with, I think helps our kids say, okay, this is where I want to get to. And if I'm understanding some of my barriers, some of the things that I'm misunderstanding, I'm more likely to work on those with somebody to get to that place that I want to go to. And yes, we all need somebody that we look up to and that we can relate to, and whether they're labeled or not.
I'm glad you finished with that, because when we come back, I want to talk about the comic book. I want to talk about the school. Some good stuff looking forward. Next up, though, first, our favorite blogger, Kelly Davis, is back, and she is better than ever. She's in the kitchen cooking up healthy, easy-to-prepare meals right now, only on A Healthier Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Kelly from foodiefresh.com, and today I want to talk about curbing your sweet tooth. For me, I have a pretty raging sweet tooth, and I've had to work a lot on making that work for me in a healthy way. There's a couple of things you can do if you have a big sweet tooth. One thing that some people do is they take something that they really love, maybe it's a big piece of chocolate cake or a chocolate chip cookie, and they're really good at limiting themselves to having just a few bites, not depriving themselves of the things that they really love. I like to do that when it comes to restaurants, and I like to share with other people. However, when I'm at home, I don't like to keep those things in my house, or I'll eat all of them very quickly. So some of the things that I do to make healthy, sweet things for dessert at home, I use all the ingredients here. One of the first things I do is I might make a fruit crisp. So a fruit crisp can be made very easily with frozen fruit or fresh fruit. I'll usually take strawberries or raspberries, and then you could put a little bit of oatmeal on top with just a tiny bit of butter or Earth Balance, whatever you use at home, with just a tiny bit of stevia or sugar or honey. Bake it in the microwave, or if you have a little bit more patience, you could bake it in the oven. It comes out really quickly in about a minute or two. Top it with some Greek yogurt. It tastes sweet, but it's not unhealthy. It has good fiber in it, fruit, oatmeal, just a little bit of sweetness, and then you have the added protein of a little bit of yogurt. It's very healthy, but it tames my sweet tooth. Another thing I might do is I like to keep some really good quality dark chocolate on hand. In fact, I think it actually helps if it costs a little bit more than what you would spend on a Hershey bar, maybe like $4, because it personally helps me not to devour it all at one time. I paid a lot for this chocolate bar, so I'm going to savor it slowly. What I might do with it is have just a square, or I might take something like a brown rice cake or a piece of toast and spread a little bit of natural peanut butter on it, and then take a square, a very small amount, and cut it in slivers and put it on top of the toaster cracker and heat it in the microwave so it gets very melty and spreads all over the top, and it's delicious, sweet, but it has some healthy fat in it, some good whole grains in it, and it's not unhealthy at all, and it will really help tame your sweet tooth. So I might take a very small amount, like just a small square, and cut it with a very sharp knife into small slivers, put it on top of the cracker with peanut butter or rice cake or toast, and then put it in the microwave or heat it under a broiler so it gets really nice and melty and covers the entire piece. That's pretty delicious. Something else that you might want to do is incorporate some healthy protein by using Greek yogurt in the place of ice cream and top it with a little bit of peanut butter and honey, or some nuts and some of that good quality dark chocolate that you have on hand. One of my very favorite things to do, especially in the wintertime, is to make my healthy hot chocolate. So for healthy hot chocolate, I usually use unsweetened vanilla almond milk. I also use cocoa powder. I really like the Special Dark cocoa powder. And then I typically use a little bit of stevia. Stevia is an all-natural sweetener. It's much better for you than Sweet and Low or other artificial sweeteners. I've heard a lot of complaints from people saying that stevia is very bitter to them, but I really encourage you, if you've tried stevia once and you didn't like it, to try other brands, because it took me quite a while to find the brand that I like the best. So what I will do is do 8 ounces of vanilla unsweetened almond milk, a tablespoon of the Special Dark Hershey's cocoa, a little bit of stevia. It's about 50 calories. So it's warm and comforting, and it's really great after a meal if you have that sweet tooth raging like I usually do. Another thing that's become really popular is to make banana soft serve. So I always keep on hand some frozen bananas in my frozen banana container. Make sure you peel these first before you put them in your container to freeze. I cut them in half and put them in the container, and you can put them in a high-speed blender or a food processor and blend them up, and they turn into this substance that resembles soft serve ice cream and tastes just like banana soft serve. If you like peanut butter, you can add a little bit of peanut butter to your banana soft serve, or even some cocoa powder to make it chocolatey, or another fruit that you really like blueberries or frozen strawberries, to incorporate some different fruits in there. It tastes just like ice cream. Another thing I might do is make a small smoothie with chocolate protein powder. I always put more chocolate into it because it only adds 10 calories. It makes it so much more delicious, with some vanilla unsweetened almond milk, some other frozen fruit, or maybe just some peanut butter with my frozen bananas. And that's really quick, easy, very filling way to get your sweet tooth satisfied. Another thing you want to think about when you're incorporating sweets into your diet is not eating sweets alone. I know that if I eat sweets, especially mid-afternoon by themselves, I'm going to crash and burn by 4 o'clock. So I try to incorporate some healthy fats, some healthy proteins, some healthy carbohydrates in with my sweets. Some ways that you can do that is dried fruit is great. I have cranberries here. I also really love dried dates, and I might put some peanut butter with them or some walnuts. You can take a date, slice it in half, put a little bit of almond butter or peanut butter inside of it, and it's just absolutely delicious. Other things I might do is do a piece of whole grain bread with some cheese and some honey. I really love the sweet and salty combination together. And then lastly, I might even make half of a PB&J as a snack. You have the salt from the peanut butter, the sweet jelly, whole grain bread, healthy fats. It's a really great way to tame your sweet tooth and incorporate those good healthy things in with it, so you won't crash and burn midday like I tend to do sometimes. So that's all you need to keep on hand for some sweet, healthy alternatives when you have a raging sweet tooth like I often do mid-afternoon and after meals. It's very easy to tame your sweet tooth in a healthy way. If you'd like more ideas, follow me at foodiefresh.com. Thanks for joining.
Welcome back into A Healthier Charlotte and part 2 of our focus on Asperger's syndrome. Let's jump back into it, and let's start right there, the word syndrome. Maybe we shouldn't use it. I mean,
No.
is that what it sounds like?
I don't.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't use it, and I'm also, this is sort of on Twitter, I'm publicly communicating to the APA and about the DSM-5 and they're getting rid of the term Asperger's. And it's frustrating. I will still use that term. They're going to call it autism spectrum disorder, but I just don't like using those words. So I'll explain to a kid, this is what we have to put down for you to get help, but this is what it is.
Are there enough psychologists and clinicians and medical professionals focusing on this right now, or is there a kind of a big gap in the amount of qualified people to look at Asperger's?
I don't know the answer to that. I think through the educational system, there needs to be a lot more help. Yeah. A lot. But in, say, private practices, I think in pretty good shape. Pediatricians, not so good.
Yeah.
They need some help.
Let's talk about, we mentioned role models, we mentioned influences, and I want to go to a couple things. I've got the comic book here that I love.
Yes.
The Max Gamer. Max Gamer. You wrote this. I'm telling you, our whole production staff are huge comic book people, so they're going to go crazy
means
for
they're
this sort of
awesome.
stuff. But tell me about it. I mean, what's the inspiration behind something like Max Gamer? Is it just an option for Aspies to see, a positive role model, something cool? I have worth, I have self-value and stuff like that. I mean, is that the
Yes.
motivation?
My Max Gamer is my co-author Ryan Kelly and I have been talking about comics for a while. He's getting his PhD done at University of South Carolina, and he and I really wanted a character that we could promote to the community and show them their inner superhero, and that's what Max is about. Where do you find your strengths? And Max, he knows all the presidents, he knows all the dinosaurs, he fixes computers, and he's awesome at a game we invented called Dinogon.
Well, and I've got to wonder. This is the awesome premiere issue here.
Yes.
The word aspergers does not appear. Maybe it appears somewhere inside, but it's not on there. So it's
Right.
that same idea of maybe it's implied and
Well,
it's not
in
necessarily.
the back. And
Okay.
that would be a good intro for a kid to say, read through it, and they read, and I have some kids read through it, and they say, oh, and then we have the conversation, and on the back, I describe all about our perception of Asperger's.
But the page has been said, I guess, that this is a cool character. You are cool. I mean, a lot of times Aspies are extremely smart,
Yes.
which, believe it or not, it's hard to believe when you're 12, but that's a cool trait to have
Yeah.
eventually.
and the thing that we really wanted to highlight is the sort of characteristics. Max didn't have friends. He would sit and play games, and kids would think, wow, that's amazing, but then they wouldn't invite him to parties. And it's his family struggled to figure out how to meet his needs. His grandfather's Aspie, so they have this interest in communication because it's genetic.
Yeah.
You can sit there and look at a family and spot the Aspies.
So let's move on to the Epiphany School. Gail, I guess I'll start with you since you are the head of the school. How important is it to focus on alternative approaches to education? Because if communication is an issue, which it is with Aspies, that kind of precludes you from doing everything if you're in a bad position. Is that kind of the main, I guess, belief behind founding the school, and the main focus here is to get them communicating and get them educated in a way that's going to be beneficial for them in the long run?
As when Mary B. Co-founded the program, it was very parent-driven, which is evidence that parents have been feeling frustrated with the services
Yeah.
at certain points for their kids, and their kids having a difficult time in more of a mainstream school to gain the skills and the tools. And so Epiphany, being an alternative school, provides that opportunity that we can work on building those skills and adding those tools to the toolbox that get them ready to be able to navigate the social world back in a mainstream school.
Mary B., what are the educational challenges when we look at getting these tools ready that she mentions? I mean, what is the toughest thing to do to teach kids with Aspies? Because it can't come easy at some points. I mean, there's got to be, I don't want to say downside, but there has to be a challenge.
Certainly. Well, and when you say what are the challenges in a regular school setting? Or
In both, really,
in-
in communicating to them adequately.
Well, it is about trying to understand what are their strengths and weaknesses, and every child, of course, is unique. And so there could be some children who have stronger needs with communication, but there could also be kids who have stronger needs in the area of emotional regulation, and that it's the anxiety that's getting in the way of them either being able to focus in school or even interact with others in school. So it's really being very mindful of what the exact needs are of each child and being able to teach to and to support the needs of each child. A big part of it, too, is being able to take an abstract concept like flexible thinking and put it in concrete terms, give direct instruction on it, but then the real wonderful thing is being able to practice it and positively reinforce it in the setting. And so that's why, a program, and not necessarily, I mean, Aspies can do well in mainstream school too. It doesn't mean that they have to be in an alternative education. It's just seeing what support they need to really be their best and feel success. So
Well, looking at mainstream school, Gail, reintegration is probably the wrong word, but reacclimation.
The
I mean,
transition
whatever it is, the
back
transition
in.
back. How do Aspies know they're ready, and then kind of how does that transition go? I mean, what are challenges they face after they've been in a pretty supportive environment? What's that next step look like?
It's a great question. As we look at within our school population, what skills and tools need to be in place, we're also looking at the generalization piece. How are they generalizing out into community friends, with family, perhaps are involved in a sport? How are these tools now being generalized? It gives us a good sense of how they'll be generalized back into a school. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some level they would need continued support as they make that transition into a new setting.
Is there anything in your gut? I mean, I'm sure you maybe don't do quantifiable studies on this, but is there any number in your gut that tells you the success rate? I mean, is it 50%, 100%? How well do they acclimate back?
We don't have those numbers yet because we're still a young school.
Sure.
We have a couple kids transitioning back into more of a mainstream school next year. I know that they will be able to move back into that setting with many more skills and ability to navigate that world because they've had so much of the practice and skill building.
I'll also add to that these, my guys, the things that I teach them specifically around bullying and getting in a big school setting is find the other Aspies. If you've got a gang of friends and you're all into, Yu-Gi-Oh or something like that, then you've got a safe group to be with. And if these kids have friends and they feel connected, they're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is kind of the case for all of us.
True.
yes.
Dr. Gaskill, how valuable are conversations like this to raise the awareness? We talk about celebrities or figures or comic books, but how valuable is having this conversation? And then I guess what's the next step past just talking about it? I mean, what does a normal person do if they want to make a difference?
It's priceless. I mean, I'm so excited that we're here doing this.
I just asked you this so you could say something good about the show.
I absolutely. Well, no, but I mean, what you're doing here is phenomenal. I love it. And even at our practice, we have Southeast Psych Studios, and I have the Dr. G. Aspie Show, and my whole mission, the mission of our practice is psychology for all, getting it into people's hands to enhance their lives. And for me, it's educate the universe about Asperger's and how it's awesome.
Yeah.
And how people can get involved is just educate yourselves, learn what it is, and stop bullying them, stop giving them a hard time, and everybody's different. Just
What
accept
is,
them.
if a parent sees this and says, hey, this piques my interest with my kid, what do they do? Do they go to their pediatrician and say, refer me to a psychologist? I mean, what's the next step?
Well, there are lots of great psychologists in town, and the pediatricians in town here in Charlotte are really good and have good pipelines to people who know. But I think it's just starting. Even on southeastpsych.com, you go to our blog and look at Asperger's articles. We have lots of really, really good content to begin that process. And the community on Twitter and Facebook, I mean, it's everywhere. You just have to Google Asperger's.
Yeah. Mary B., what does the future look like? I mean, are you optimistic that the general culture will embrace this more and become more aware of this and see it not as a syndrome, but just as another person? I mean, what are we looking at maybe 10 years down the road?
It's a bright future. I'm very optimistic. It's because the awareness is growing day by day, and the ownership and excitement that kids take in celebrating who they are, and the parents and teachers, because through the knowledge comes understanding, but then also acceptance and celebration, and that's where the sky's the limit. And I feel very, very confident that things are going to be great.
And I don't think we're going to have a choice. We're going to be buying everything that we care about from Aspies.
Yeah.
Well, if Mark Zuckerberg may be one,
If
and
he
he
is.
runs Facebook, that's it.
Yeah, right. I mean,
We'd be
it's
lost without them. Cell phones, computers.
cell phones, computers, rockets. There's
Legos.
Legos. You can't be a master builder for Lego unless you're on the spectrum.
Yeah.
You just can't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kind of suggestions that a large percentage of your Nobel laureates in math and physics, your spelling bee winners, your geography bee winners. If you kind of watch these guys, like, oh, okay, you are hyper-focused in on this one thing more than anybody else, the social world falls away, and you become the best in the world at something.
All right, guys. Well, I've got a comic book to read, so
Yes.
thanks for joining us. No, that was, great discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank
for
you.
this.
Thank you
Really
very
appreciate
much.
it. And that's it. We're out of time this week on A Healthier Charlotte. I want to remind all of you at home to visit cltblog.com for more unique news, information, and current events here in the Queen City that you just can't get anywhere else. For our guests on the panel and for our crew here in the studio, thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm reminding you that as you go along, you don't need talent, you just need courage. I'm Bobby DeMuro, and this has been A Healthier Charlotte.